All right, good morning. This is the Monday, October 24th meeting of the Policy Committee. Thank you to Ms. Green and Mr. Needleman for joining us this morning. I know Ms. Hubley will be with us a little late, but we're going to get started since we have a quorum. And I'm going to turn things over to Ms. Green, who's going to begin with our 600 level policies that are recommended for changes. You may recall these are the last 4 of the 600 level policies, and then we're going to work our way through the 700s today. So Ms. Green, it's up to you.
Thank you, Dr. Yannicone. Good morning, everybody. As Dr. Yannicone mentioned, we have a few remaining 600 level policies that had to go through a little bit more in-depth review. So we're bringing those forward to you today. The first one is policy 609, investment of district funds. This is probably the most detailed and one with the biggest changes. It had solicitor and our financial advisor review. What this policy does and what the language that we're adding is Act 10 language. Act 10 are investments that are allowable. It expands what the current school code and Pennsylvania statute for investing of district dollars allows for. So what this did, it gives us a little bit more flexibility on how we invest our district funds and what we can invest in. Right now, there was also language added so that in the event, because Act 10 changed in 2016, at the time, previous administration felt that the policy as it stood was flexible enough. This really identifies and details more language on exactly what type of investments we can do. There was also language added at the recommendation of both our solicitor and our financial advisor to put a little bit of a line in there to say, and any other updates to investment law in the state of Pennsylvania. So what will happen is we won't have to bring this policy back if there was any changes that happened in the language. So if there was anything added under Act 10 or the school code or deleted, then this policy absorbs that so that we can move forward and it wouldn't mess with our investment strategies. So there, like I said, there's a lot of changes or additions to this, and it's really the Act 10 investment language. It really details it. So if you have any questions about anything specific in this policy, I'd be more than happy to answer those questions. This does not impact the way that we have previously invested. It just shores up and lays the information out specifically in the policy.
So Ms. Green, if I can just add to that.
Sure.
So the section that I'm now showing on the screen under guidelines, that is the section that was refined by our solicitor. Everything in bold, you may remember, is what our PSBA guidance has suggested or changes to language as a result of updated code, in particular, in this case, Act 10. And then what is not in bold is what was in the original policy. So as Ms. Green mentioned, this is a great deal of change for policy 609, which is why we took some time, extra time to review this before we brought it forward. Are there any questions on this policy or concerns about the language that's been added?
If I could, sorry to interrupt, if I could just ask, I guess, a clarifying question. Ms. Green, when you describe the language being added to the policy, such as including laws passed after the adoption of this policy, is that sort of and I think you described this. I just want to make sure. Maybe I don't think I heard it correctly. It's so that future consideration doesn't have to be given to legal updates and things like that, right? It just kind of happens automatically. It's like a cost of living increase.
Yes, that is correct. If Act 10 language changed and it added additional vehicles for us to invest in, or it took current vehicles that's in the statute right now away, our policy wouldn't have to, it wouldn't stop us based upon the approval of our policy. It gives us that flexibility to absorb that language as it comes in. And obviously, if there's ever a situation where, you know, we would want to peel back some language or do anything like that, we would most definitely bring it forward. But this just gives it the flexibility that if there's language changes in the act, it doesn't stop. It doesn't impede our investment activity.
Thank you. That's great. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. The next policy is 618 student activity funds. This policy was reviewed further by myself and Ms. Jenko, and with the advisors, that's Mr. LaRocca at the high school, who oversees the student activities. So originally in this policy, it talked about the high school building administrators being the custodials and being responsible for the funds. So we just aligned this language to ensure that it followed the district policy. These funds, even though they're custodial funds, are the responsibility of the districts. It's in the district's bank account. It follows our purchasing policy. We are the ones that cut the checks. There's no separate fund, separate bank. There's no separate checks that are written by the high school administrators. Everything flows through the business office with our protocols and practices. So we wanted to just align that language to make sure that that was clear. Are there any questions on this policy? And really, the big change here was under the delegation of responsibility. Okay, if there's no questions on this policy, we can move forward to 626, which is federal fiscal compliance. As you will see on this one, there's no changes as far as the actual meat of the policy. What did change was there was some additions of attachments. So if you look at the attachments, there's 4 attachments on here. It talks about allowability of cost, cash management, costs, obligations, property and purchasing, and monitoring for any subrecipients. I will tell you, we don't have subrecipients right now that's using federal funds. So this is still in place, but as of right now, it's not active, this procedure, because we don't have subrecipients. The other attachments basically identified delegation of responsibility. So we had to identify, as far as a process was concerned, if it was myself, the superintendent, the board that was doing actions with certain decisions. So a lot of this identified myself and our federal programs coordinator, who is Dr. Michelle Lutz, as far as making sure that reports are submitted, making sure that costs are allowable, making sure that monitoring is occurring. So we had to go through and make some decisions as far as who was responsible for certain activities. Anything that's revised or changed is being reviewed by Dr. Yannicone and has the final approval at that point. So the bulk of everything is through myself and, again, Dr. Lutz in my office. And then again, there's some final approvals where we would have to submit to the state to pass through to the federal agencies, and that's done by Dr. Yannicone, that approval. All right, I'm not sure if you have any questions on any of those or. Nope, okay. We can go to 626.1. And with this one, it just, again, if you look at this policy, you'll see the check marks or the X's, and this was very similar to what was identified in the attachments in the previous policies. We just had to pick the person. So you'll see in here that it basically is overseen by my department and myself. So between myself and Ms. Jenko, we will make sure that we are in compliance with federal spending guidelines. Are there any questions on that? Okay, if there's no questions on those 4 policies will be brought forward at our next board meeting for first read. And Dr. Yannicone, do you want me to continue, or do you want to? Okay, so we'll go into the 700 policies. So we'll start with the 700 policies that had minimal language changes. And when we talk about minimal language changes, We are looking at what was proposed by PSBA. So 701 facilities planning, there were some minimal changes to the language here. And basically what this did, what it aligned our policy language with school code changes. So changes that you're seeing here in bold are aligning us with our policy to the school code. Are there any questions on 701? Please know these, the policies that are related to facilities were also reviewed by Mr. Thorne. Okay, so 701.1, naming rights is the next policy that we reviewed. Just so that you know, moving down the list, we are retiring policy 721 as redundant, and it is being absorbed with 701.1, and that was recommendation by PSBA. So at this point, we're talking about naming rights. This is if somebody wanted to name something in our facilities after a person. What we did here was through delegation of responsibility is there's areas that we will bring to the property committee if there was a nomination made for naming rights of any section of our facilities. So if you'll see under delegation of responsibility, the second line, it says the property committee shall work with the superintendent to review nominations. So if there's anything that's brought forward, it will be brought to this committee prior to being approved. Any questions on this policy? Okay. Look at 702. Gifts, grants, and donations. This policy is absorbed. We're retiring 702.1 and 720 and absorbing the language into this policy. Basically, it is it's telling that the board will accept donations. Those donations need to be reviewed. Obviously, we need to make sure, I always give this example, if somebody wants to donate a piano to the district, we want to make sure that the piano is not just somebody giving the district a piano that no longer works. We want to make sure that it will be able to be used within our district and won't cost more to repair than it's actually worth. We are going to be working on an AR to address 702.1 and 720, and that'll be the procedures and the practices. Are there any questions on this policy? Okay, we can go to 703. Actually, this, oh wait, we'll just continue. I'm sorry, we'll continue because 702.1 is under another heading. So 703, sanitary management. There are some clarifying language changes in here as far as our practices within the district. This was also reviewed by Mr. Thorne, and he accepted these changes as well. Any questions on 703? 704, maintenance. That is very similar to 703. We are clarifying language in this policy. Again, this was reviewed by Mr. Thorne as well. Any questions on 704? Okay, 707, which is use of school facilities. There were some minimal changes here. Just as a reminder, this policy was revised in 2021. So this is just adding some additional language. The biggest piece of the language here is just expanding use of tobacco products to include vaping and jewels and all of that language. So just minimal changes there. Any questions on use of school facilities? Okay, policy 708, lending of equipment and books. This policy had minimal language changes in order to update to reflect our current practices within our district. Any questions on 708? Okay, 710, use of facilities by staff. Again, minimal language changes that updates with our current practice within the district. Any questions on this policy? Okay, 716, integrated pest management. This was updated with some minor language changes. You'll see that in PSBA's under delegation of responsibility, they actually had a IPM coordinator listed. We updated that language to reflect the superintendent or designee. We actually do not have an IPM coordinator as listed. So just some minor language changes there. Any questions on 716? Okay, all of these policies will be brought forward at our next meeting for first read. The next set of policies, these had more substantive changes or they were new. So we'll start with 702.1 crowdfunding. Here, this gave us the option of either allowing for crowdfunding or not. We are recommending that we prohibit any type of crowdfunding. So this would be like GoFundMe accounts. So we are prohibiting that through our districts or through fundraising or anything like that at this time. Do you have any questions about this recommendation?
As Ms. Green mentioned, this would be a much more significant decision by the board as to whether or not to permit crowdfunding. There are districts that do permit crowdfunding on behalf of the district. We can share more specifically concerns we have around management of that. But obviously, if the board wanted, you can see the language that's been crossed out. All of that would be put back in if the board selected the first bullet where it says the board permits organizations to crowdfund. So I've highlighted that there at the top. But because we selected, we prohibit it, everything else goes away.
Dr. Yannicone, if I could, and Ms. Green, is the reason for the recommendation that what is the reason for the recommendation? Yes.
Ms. Green, why don't you talk about that?
Sure. So especially from a financial perspective, with GoFundMe accounts and these types of different accounts, such as use of Venmo and things like that, we start to lose fiscal control over the collection of funds. The district won't have a specific funding vehicle in order to collect the funds. Usually with GoFundMe's, that's somebody that's personally setting that up. It's flowing through their bank account. And you start to get into those control measures. And again, it's also a control measure of people just starting the GoFundMe and representing the district possibly in a way that's not aligned with where we want it to be. Obviously, there's some procedures in place if we decided to move forward with the crowdfunding. But again, in my past experience and a lot of the districts that we're in, people stay away from using the crowdfunding platforms because, again, the fiscal controls are very, very hard to manage from within this office because you're dealing with people collecting money personally through electronic means.
Thank you.
And I would not give out the district's bank account information for them to use the platform to collect the money. So again, you're dealing with people's personal accounts, and trying to manage that from our perspective would be very, very difficult.
Thank you.
Kara, can I ask a question?
Sure.
Why do other districts use this? Do you know that? Like, what do they use it for?
In my experience with other districts, many of the BAs do not allow the crowdfunding.
Okay.
Some do, like you'll see on there that it talks about booster groups and parent organizations.
Okay.
But once again, just to be very clear, booster organizations and parent organizations, we are not they do not fall under our fiscal controls. They
Right.
have their own bank accounts. They have their own separate organizations. They manage their own money that flows in and out of their bank account. So that would be a reason for maybe some districts to allow boosters and parent groups. But at this point, because again, they're not under our umbrella when it comes to our controls, then we shouldn't have to dictate how it's used or try to manage or be responsible for that. Because once
Okay.
again, the reason for doing the crowdfunding could not align with district goals and policies or what the board or administration recommends.
Okay, I just wanted to have a better understanding of like why it would even be something we would entertain to use.
I think it's just in today's day and age.
No, I hear
the
you.
ease of it, yeah, that's the big reason that people come, is because they're like, it's now an electronic age, and that's how people, a
Right.
lot of people don't have cash anymore. They use their
Right.
debit and credit cards, so.
Okay, thank you.
The
Welcome.
previous, I just want to mention too, as well, Ms. Hubley, that the previous policy on gifts and grants and donations. What's nice about that is if somebody were to decide to fundraise on behalf of the district and present a gift to the district, the board can make the decision about whether or not to accept that gift, as we do with the Education Foundation, with booster groups, et cetera, from time to time. So the policy 702 still permits the district to receive funds from outside groups. It's just we're not going to manage the fundraising through crowdfunding. That's also why they're linked, like it's 702 and 702.1. Okay, so are you three okay with us prohibiting it? All right.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right, so we'll go to 705 now.
Yep, next policy to review is 705, facilities and workplace safety. So the big piece in this, you'll see under the guidelines, the red that's deleted, is a certified workplace safety committee. We do not have that, and we're not required to have the certified workplace safety committee. We do have a safety committee though that meets. It's head by Mr. Steve Chinta and Ms. Kerr. So they do meet on a monthly basis or a regular basis to discuss safety concerns. I believe that there are building level reps. There's a multitude of people that are involved in this, but this just takes out the certified workplace safety committee, because that is, that takes it to a different place on what we are required to do. But I did want to make sure that you're aware that we do have a working safety committee.
Can I just ask Ms. Green and Dr. Yannicon, just for I think I know the answer to this, but just for elucidation for the rest of the board and members of the public, the fact that we don't have a certified workplace safety committee it does not mean that we allow an unsafe workplace in any way, right?
Correct.
Yeah, absolutely correct, Mr. Needleman. That's the policy exists, and you can see under delegation of responsibility that it says that either I or a designee would periodically review our health and safety rules. And as Ms. Green mentioned, we actually have a committee that meets monthly, and it's a large committee. It includes members of our professional staff, support staff, and it's led by our supervisor of campus safety and our director of human resources. So we're very purposeful about our review of safety procedures, but a certified workplace safety committee involves a different level of requirements, and it's not something that's required and not something that we have in place.
Thank you.
Of course.
Any other questions on this policy? Okay, we're going to move to 706, property records. And you'll see that there were several changes made to reflect district practices under guidelines. It's records of consumable supplies shall be maintained on a continual inventory basis. So that's like your annual supplies. The building secretaries and building department secretaries are responsible for that, but it's not logged the same way as our fixed assets are. So I wanted to make sure that we took that out there. And then we have a financial database. We actually have in our e-finance a fixed asset module that houses all of our records for our fixed assets. So instead of the permanent tag, and that's the way that it's identified in our financial database, which also, I just want to remind you, gets audited every year with our local audit. So we are required to do a fixed asset inventory listing with the auditors to review. Also on this 706.1 will be retired, and it will be replaced with an AR that is attached to this policy. So just so you know, 706.1 is disposition of surplus property. It tells us how we can dispose of property. This will be turned into an AR attached to 706. Any questions on 706? Okay, the next is 709, building security. So you'll see that there was an update to the actual, to reflect the current title of Mr. Chinta. Mr. Chinta did review this policy. We added video surveillance language based upon PSBA's recommendations. So those signs are actually, there are some signs up. We're moving forward to make sure that there's clear signage in parking lots and in buildings to make sure that people are aware that there is video surveillance. And then we will be drafting an AR to reflect our current practices for admissions into our buildings. So that will be coming forward. Any questions on policy 709?
So just as a reminder for the board members, we wait to draft the administrative regulations until the policy has its second read and is formally approved by the board. So all of the policies that we had revised and the board had approved through June, those ARs were written over the summer. And then this winter and spring, we'll write all the ARs that are related to policies that are approved this fall and winter. Any questions about that or this adjustment to the policy?
Okay.
As the board knows, we've added a significant number of video surveillance cameras in the middle school this summer. And we are in the process during this school year and next summer through part of the grant funds that we've received, safety grant funds we've received, we'll be adding at the high school, and then at the end we'll get to Erdenheim. Erdenheim has a number of cameras, as does the high school, but we're going to increase the flexibility of the administrative team and the local police as needed to see different areas of the buildings and the parking lots that currently are not quite as clear as they could be.
Any questions on this policy? Okay, these 4 policies will also be moved forward for first read at our next board meeting. Just to review again, there's several policies that we are going to retire. The first one is 702.1. And if you recall, that will be retired because we are absorbing that into 702. Also 706.1, I just spoke about that. That will become an AR and attached to policy 706. Policy 711, capital assets. This is the establishment and use of capital reserve funds. And based on PSBA's recommendation, you don't need this as a separate policy because it was addressed in 601 fiscal objectives, 619 district audit, 620 fund balance, and 622 GASB statement 34 and 701 facilities planning. So they felt like between those other policies that this language was addressed in those other policies, so this would be considered redundant. So we are going to retire that based on PSBA's recommendation. The next policy is 720, gifts, grants, and bequests. Once again, this is being combined with policy 702. And then finally, 721, naming of school district facilities. This is being combined with policy 701.1, which is naming rights. So it's considered redundant. So we're absorbing that. So those 5 policies will be presented if there are no questions or objections at the next board meeting to be retired. Any questions? No? Okay, and finally, there were 2 new policies that were presented and I believe still being reviewed. And we're not at the point to bring those forward for approval.
Actually, Ms. Green, we were able to get that done.
Okay.
I know Ms. Green concentrated on all the financial and facilities related policies. And I was trying to take care of cell telephones and service animals. And we were, by the end of last week, able to get these 2 done. So I kept them on the agenda. So the cell telephones policy is a new policy recommended by PSBA. It's pretty straightforward. It just provides general guidelines for staff who are issued district cell phones. The only employees of the district who are issued cell phones are administrators in Springfield Township. We do not issue cell phones to any other work group. And so this policy covers how we proceed when administrators are issued a cell phone. We will have an administrative regulation for this policy that we'll write following its adoption by the board. Are there any questions about policy 717? Okay. And then 718 is a new policy. And while currently we do not have any requests from community members for service animals in the schools, PSBA does recommend that we be prepared for any such request. And so in this case, this policy was reviewed by Dr. Lutz under the Office of Support Services and by Dr. Johnston, as well as by Dr. Van Voren, our Director of Student Services. We believe it, as PSBA recommends, is appropriate to have the policy despite the fact that we do not currently have any of these requests. It says very clearly where the responsibilities lie from families, as well as the person who would require the service animal, whether that would be a staff member or a student. This policy was also reviewed by our Director of Human Resources. And I should mention that cell telephones was reviewed by our Director of IT. So this is a fairly straightforward policy. You can see here that because it's new, none of the language is bolded because all of the language is new. Essentially, this allows, again, community members or staff members as needed and appropriate to make a request to have a service animal on site. And then there's also a section here for service animals being admitted to public events. You may have attended athletic events on occasion where typically this is a dog that has an actual, I'll call it a coat, but marking on the outside on fabric that says this is a service animal, either an animal that's learning for a variety of reasons to support a person who needs that assistance. And so we have on occasion actually permitted those service animals into Spartan Stadium, for example, but this would formalize the policy. And then there's obviously responsibility for who is going to supervise and care for the animal, who's going to control the animal, et cetera, et cetera. Are there any questions about this policy? Mr. Needleman, you kind of look like you have a question.
No, I'm sorry. I'm just kind of thinking things through.
Yeah.
Just kind of thinking about it. I'm actually involved in litigation right now where somebody was injured really, really badly by a service animal. Mm-hmm. And thinking, it was a couple months ago about the article in the paper about the alligator that was a service animal. So I'm just, but I think this covers it quite well because in those rare circumstances where somebody could be arguably threatened, and I'm a firm believer in the value of service animals, but in those rare circumstances where somebody could be injured or threatened by a service animal, it looks like the district administrators have the authority to do what may be necessary under the circumstances. So so sorry for the screwed up face.
No,
I don't have a terribly good poker face.
The other thing I think is worthwhile to mention to all the members of the board is that service animals, to be designated as a service animal, is a significantly high bar. And it is not the same as an animal, for example, for comfort. There are times when there are, for example, you'll hear stories about animals brought on planes that are comfort animals. That is a different bar than the bar for being approved as a service animal. So a service animal would be a highly trained, in this case, typically you're talking about a dog, but it would also, in theory, could include a miniature horse. So there are some fairly significant training involved in the preparation for these service animals. But you can see here assisting individuals who are blind or have low vision, alerting individuals who are deaf or hard of hearing, nonviolent protection or rescue work, pulling a wheelchair, assisting an individual during a seizure, alerting individuals to allergens, et cetera. So these are very highly trained animals, right? So the provision of emotional support, well-being, or comfort or companionship does not meet the guidelines for this policy. So I think that it's an important designation and distinction for the board to understand, and for us to understand, quite frankly, as we were moving through the policy for some of the same reasons you just mentioned, Mr. Lieberman. We want to make sure that all of our students and staff are safe at school and in the office, because this does include office staff. So that those are all of the policies. That was a lot of policies for us to go through. I know that is all of the 700s. We remain to have the 800 and the 900 level policies, which we are anticipating that in November we will receive PSBA's final review of the 800 levels, and then likely in January the 900s with the holidays approaching. And so we anticipate that in the winter we'll be able to complete our policy review, which, as you remember, we started about a little over a year ago. So this would conclude the 600s and the 700s. Are there any other questions around these policies or other policies that the board would like us to be keeping an eye on moving forward? Okay, we did have, I'll just mention to the board, we have policy 105.2, which is exemption from instruction. And this fall, we did receive several requests for exemptions from instruction. And we had a good piece of feedback from one of our community members that the policy specifically does not include the word annually for how often community members who would like an exemption from instruction should submit that request. And so we're going to clarify that, but we're going to wait until we finish the 800s and 900s, because typically the requests for exemption have already come in within the first month of school for this school year. And the policy specifically states that community members should make a request in writing to the principal and the classroom teachers. And so we believed as a team that it was baked in the policy that you would have to make those requests on an annual basis or at the beginning of a course of study. But we'll clarify that language in a revision we'll bring forward to the board prior to the next cycle of classes, which will be this spring. Are there any questions about that? Okay. We have made an amendment to our administrative regulation that encourages our principals to maintain a record of requests that have come in and do our very best to make sure that our staff are notified in a timely fashion, and that parents who've made requests previously have access to whatever information they need to make a decision for their family. Okay. All right, so that will bring us back to the agenda, to guidelines for public comment. And I think we have we have no attendees at this point. So I don't think we have any public comment. Future meeting dates, as I mentioned, it's to be determined. We'll wait to hear from PSBA on the 800s, and then we'll let you know when we're ready to bring those forward. And if there's no other matters for the board, we would entertain a motion to adjourn.
Moved.
All right. Thank you. Ms. Hewley, Ms. Green, you okay with us adjourning?
Yes. Can I ask a favor?
Of
Can we
course.
move the meeting not to early in the morning?
Yeah, we can move it to any time
Okay.
that works for the committee.
Okay. It's just
Um,
really tough for me, especially on a Monday.
It's not a problem. You know, we're here at your disposal. So
Okay.
you let us know what is a better time of day for the board.
I mean, for me, after 3 o'clock, or I could even do after 2:30 would be better. I don't know
Okay,
if that works for everybody else, though.
Ms. Green?
So that's okay for me, depending on the day, and I don't know that until 2 weeks ahead of time.
Okay,
But you know, I'll just indicate when the meeting is set. you know.
Ms. Green, I think you had mentioned to me previously that Tuesdays are a good day for you. Is that still the case?
Tuesdays actually are a good day, with the exception of November 8th that I said I'd be in there. But Tuesdays are a good day for me.
Okay. Mr. Needleman, how about you?
It could work. I really don't know. It's so kind of up in the air. So, but let's change it if that works, and I'll make adjustments however I need to.
Okay, so would 3 o'clock or 3:30 or 4 o'clock be better for you? Or would you rather, for example, today we have academic affairs at 5. Do you have a preference on a start time?
I have preference on start time.
No preference. Ms. Hubley?
Any one of those times would be better for me.
Okay. Mr.
Yeah,
Needleman, I know
anyone.
you're probably your court hearings would determine.
I'm sorry.
Your court hearings would probably determine the time of the day that would work best for you.
Yeah, exactly. So it's just kind of I'll figure it out.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll look at sometime between 3 and 4 on a Tuesday in the future. Okay. And hopefully you're going to be a lot less busy after the 800s and 900s are done. It's been a busy committee for a little over a year, but once we get through these bulk revisions, so then quarterly we receive what are called PNN updates, but the Pennsylvania network will provide us legal updates if they recommend any revisions or updates to policies. So at that point, we would probably be looking at a maximum a quarterly meeting. And that's sort of more typical of the other committees as well, as you know. We've just met a lot more frequently as we've been going through this policy revision to get us up to date, because it had been a little over a decade since the last time we did a bulk revision. Okay. Terrific. All right. Well, thank you all very much. Have a great week.
Thank
And
you.
we'll see you either this afternoon at Academic Affairs or next Tuesday at the board meeting.
All right,
Very
thank
good.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everybody.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye-bye.